Even the sparrow finds a place by your altar. Even the wanderer who roams. Even the fatherless is embraced by the Father. We're coming home, coming home. We're coming home, coming home. Even the sparrow finds a place by your altar. Even the wanderer who roams. Even the fatherless is embraced by the Father. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. Coming home. The table is set. I will sit down, surrounded by friends and feast. The table is set. We will sit down, surrounded by friends and feast. Even the sparrow finds a place by your altar. Even the wanderer who roams. Even the fatherless is embraced by the Father. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. Coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. We're coming home. Coming home. The table is set. We will sit down, surrounded by friends.
Good morning. I was a little late getting in, but I've got family home, so we're probably going to keep this to 2 hours today. And but thank you everyone who's coming, the evening folks over in the UK and in South Africa, and of course the Americans here who are not at Walmart. Well, let's we had Skank dropped out, and so Ben, if you're listening, you can hop in. You can hit the link and hop in. Otherwise, we'll just do estuary with a few others wearing. Well, it's my black and blue. It's my. We'll bring in Jacob first. Jacob, how are you?
I'm always well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, you're a semi-regular. You've done this. You've been on a few times. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Remind people who you are.
Hey, yeah, I'm a teacher here in just right outside of San Antonio, Texas. I'm an Orthodox Christian. We a Greek Orthodox Church, Saint Sophia down here. I also teach the high school class, Sunday schools for the church, which is pretty interesting. I got 2 daughters and a wife, happily married, and I'm a giant John DiPaggio fan. Also a fan of this channel, obviously, and so yeah, I guess that's why I'm here.
All right, thank you, Jacob. Let's see, who should we bring in next? Let's bring in our Irishman who lives in the Netherlands. Good morning, Jeremy.
Hello, Paul. How are you? Good morning.
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, man. Good. So I was at the Breakwater Estuary event in November.
Oh, wonderful.
About 3 weeks ago. So yeah, lovely experience. Very nice. Good to meet Cassidy and all the people from the Utrecht Estuary, and the Van family were very welcoming and very kind to all of us. So yeah, it was a really nice event.
Terrific, terrific. Well, welcome, Jeremy. And then two very regulars. I don't know who's more regular. Well, I don't know. We'll bring in Neil next. Good morning, Neil. Oh, then he drops right out. So looks like he had a little family eruption. So then we'll bring in Michael next. So Michael, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. I may also have family eruptions during this next 2 hours. So, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I did get to see Skankenstein on Wednesday. He is here in San Antonio. I didn't know Jacob
Wow.
looked so close, but he was visiting family. So I'll pass greetings on. He wasn't sure what his plans were going to be for today. So, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right, and we with what I did something different with the sign up. Some of you might want to know how do you get to join this illustrious panel? Well, what I do is I put out a sign up sheet in the members section of the channel, and so yeah, it's pretty much you have to be a member, but you can be a low cost member to participate. You don't have to be a no wait no ads or a I forget what my highest membership tier is called, a supporter or sponsor or whatever. Just your little $3 membership can get you into the show. So, and we had two alternates this week, and Stephanie just said, "No, I can't do it." So Ben Dahl is also was also signed up as alternate due. So Ben, if you want to come in. Otherwise, maybe we'll just run it with the people that we have, which is fine. Because given this group, I don't think we'll have any problem filling the time. So maybe we'll begin with our I run this estuary style. What does that mean? That means that we've sort of done introductions. Most of the people here have been on before. And then we pitch an idea to the group, and then we point to somebody else's idea that someone else has pitched to the group, and then we play. Then we just talk through whatever the things that are. And like I said, I've got family at home, so I'm probably going to keep this to knock this off at about 2 hours, and then join my family back there. And yeah, so let's begin. Jacob, do you have anything that you'd like to pitch to the group?
Not really. My wife and I were joking around about the origins of Black Friday last night, and we were all talking about how, over the last few years, people have made jokes about how the deals go further and further back, and now it's not a deal anymore, but it's still chaotic, and so we decided every day is Black Friday, and it got kind of a laugh yesterday. So maybe that'll be my contribution, my pitch, is we should talk about chaos and bad deals.
All right. Chaos and bad deals. Very good. Jacob. Jeremy, do you have something you'd like to pitch?
Yeah, I do. So my pitch is a Hagrid of your own understanding. So Hagrid is the character out of Harry Potter, who's a big giant, if anybody's familiar with the thing. And I had a Hagrid of my own understanding right up until the moment I saw the movie, and then Robbie Coltrane colonized me and transformed the Hagrid of my own understanding into the Hagrid of Robbie Coltrane. And when I was reading a book to my son, I realized that he still had access to a Hagrid of his own understanding. Whereas when I read the story and it came to the point where Hagrid came into the story, the only person I could see in my mind was Robbie Coltrane, right? So I had lost something. What I've been thinking about is it's kind of related in a way to what the Boss Van Os has been doing, and Lucas Van Os has been doing on his channel, which is their discussion of followers of the way, which I incidentally saw that they have a live stream on Sunday at 1700 Central European time. And as Lucas said, adjust to your own local area. That's probably like 12 o'clock for most of America. But so what I was thinking was that my notion of what Christ is and who Christ is is so heavily intermediated through films, movies, and even this kind of crappy little art you often get in religious texts, where it's like it emphasizes the happiness of look how happy everybody is, look at the sheer joy in their faces, right? That's trying to dispossess me of the Christ of my own understanding, and to put into my mind an image of Christ that wouldn't have happened 100 years ago, right? You would have had art, you would have had icons, you would have had carvings. This has been here for a long time, but there is some element of whatever Christ of my own understanding I have has been thwarted. And I'm just kind of curious about what the mechanism of rediscovering the Christ of your own understanding through art, through active imagination, through storytelling, through inhabiting and relating to the characters in that particular story.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Jeremy. Neil, do you have a pitch?
Yep. Good morning. So hi everyone. Hi everybody. Skip my intro. I'm over at my parents' house for Thanksgiving, but I think I'm good for the next 2 hours. My name is Neil Jordan. I go in the corner by Neil Daedalus, and married. Have a 9-year-old. Lived in New Orleans for about 9 or 10 years, and originally from New Jersey, not too far from Mr. PBK. So my pitch, I would like to talk about the topic of the virtues and pitfalls of arranged marriage. Our current generation under 30, marriage rates are at 15% and falling. We seem to have the attitude still in the West that once you hit a certain age, you do you, kid. Good luck. And we push the baby bird out of the nest and go and fly and see if you can find a valid partner. And I've got in my mind kind of like a spectrum or the shades of arranged marriage, all the way from full-blown Petersonian enforced monogamy all the way to the present. And that's kind of a joke, but you had to be there. And yeah, so I'm interested in discussing, perils and the pitfalls of arranged marriage.
All right.
Virtues and the pitfalls. Yeah.
Virtues and pitfalls of arranged marriage. Very good. Michael, what do you have in mind this morning?
Okay, I'll try to make this try to streamline this this thought. It's nebulous for which is why I think it's probably needs discussion to coalesce. But I'll start with I've been enjoying your videos on discipleship because that's a perennial topic, and one of the things I think that's really connected to it, is there was a discussion. It's been a lot of places. I saw it in the CRC Voices about this thing of like where's the real poverty line, and like the real poverty line is actually somewhere of like $130,000 depending on whether or not you need childcare. And then what I was thinking about that with was a clip that was on, I guess it was on Joe Rogan with Brett Weinstein, who's been floating around Twitter. And he's talking about what the sexual revolution and contraception and all this stuff undid is it took away the incentive for marriage, and it funneled it towards ideologies. And how does that, like women are nurturing ideologies, I guess you could say. And so my thought was like, where do you find that balance of because I think ideologies of religion obviously have affected things like reproduction even before the sexual revolution. And so how do you create a culture that lasts? That was like the tagline of my book. That's the question. So I'm gonna I gotta pop out for a minute, but that's
all right. That's a lot of good, healthy stuff on the table. I don't feel the need to put anything more on there. So, all right. Well, let's go right to the pointing round. Jacob, what did you hear that grabbed your interest?
I don't want to say your name. Is Jer?
Jeremy.
Oh, Jeremy. God. I jotted down mechanism of re-understanding Christ through your own through your own artistic lens, through your own through artistic mediums like storytelling. It's like a Dr. Martin Shaw style, like re-understanding, rejuvenation, like Matthew Paggio rejuvenation of Christ. Is that what you're trying to aim at?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, fundamentally, yeah.
I mean, that's pretty interesting. I'm a sucker for art. I just bugged my priest for months until he gave me a blessing to try my hand at iconography. So, I mean, I'm always down to talk about art. And, but also, I've been having almost weekly debates with friends at church about arranged marriages, because we just had our Greek fest, and after certain dancing, they dance separate, right? The girls dance, the boys dance, and then they have a joint dance, and your partner would be who your parents and grandparents had decided, you'd be marrying traditionally. And so ever since Greek Fest, we've been having the same kind of debate whether or not this is good or bad, or whether this is the thing we need to preserve the culture, grow the church, and so I'm down for either of those.
Right. All right. Thank you, Jacob. Jeremy, what would you like to point to?
Yeah, I'm down for either of them as well. But I suppose
Arranged marriages, because you
can't vote for myself, so I'm definitely going for Neil. I like the marriage thing. I think that's a really nice topic.
Okay. Neil, what would you like to point to?
I wanted to point to Jer, but I'm gonna change my mind and point to the baby on the screen with Mr. Sartori. And I'm gonna point to how do you create a culture that lasts, and he seems to be lasting over there. So I'm gonna point to him.
All right. All right. You're pointing one way, but the screens aren't. I don't know. You're pointing to Neil? All right, it's reversed. So, all right, you're pointing to Neil's arranged marriages. I think we have a sense. The marriage culture that lasts, and then also, I think the Hagrid of your own understanding and discipleship. I think they'll come together. Neil, why don't you begin by fleshing out, if you have any more to flesh out in terms of this topic?
Sure. So I've written this down, and hopefully that'll keep me on point here. Because as I see it, there are shades of arranged marriage, and I think in general, I don't think all American or Western families are in category one that I'm about to outline, but I think in general, most are, and I certainly was growing up. And category one, I would call it like the secular standard, which is full authenticity, which is the you're on your own, kid. It's kind of trusting in the spirits that exists and a person's own instincts to the detachment of the parent from the child. So full independence of the child, and say, good luck, and I'm here for you. It's not saying that the parent is telling the kid that they can't ask for advice or anything like that, but basically the parent takes no proactive action, or the community takes no proactive action to guide mate choice or guide partnership in any regard. Okay, so that's where we are. Number one. Number two would be I would call it kind of a gentle set apartness, something like that, where say like, okay, the existing structures, it's basically setting the expectation with children that the existing structures that the world has in place for finding a mate, things like Tinder or Bumble. It's been a while since but so I don't really know what the latest is, but that those existing structures do not work well. Understanding how the game works on those structures and things like that, and basically saying to children like, hey, you have autonomy, like you have the ability to choose your destiny, but let me know if you need any guidance. And I feel it's part of my job as a parent to help you in this. And that means also my network and those that I know and I trust, and basically leaving it up to the child's voluntary choice, if they want to tap into that network. And the next would be kind of the next tier of that would be like the standard expectation for the community. And this would probably be where the Amish fit, I would wager, is that the child asks parents for help. Like that's the standard expectation, that the child says like, I understand the pitfalls. Like I'm going to trust you and and what I would say in that, in number 2 and number 3, it's like, there's a necessity of communal compatibility. So there's the necessity of family compatibility, but then there's also the necessity of a greater community compatibility. Doesn't need to necessarily mean same religion, but like and what I mean by same religion is like exact same denomination of whatever. But I would say in terms of virtues, values, things like that, there has to be, in general compatibility. But then ultimately, it's up to the individual children to, accept each other. Like that would be an essential part of the bargain. Like they have to accept. But I think, and the other thing I'll mention about that is that like when a current system, whatever it might be, sociological system is not working, I think it's prudent to go back into history and look at like what is the historical standard. And as far as I understand, like the historical standard across time, across religions, across tribes, across it's that combination of like the family unit network. But in general, I would say the family unit network always relied on the children agreeing. So what I'm saying is like the good father allows his daughter or his son to say, no, I can't, and I there are certainly like truly forced marriages where, so that would be like a category 4, where, it's like, you're doing this no matter what, because it's good for the family, and you're going to make this sacrifice, and you're going to pick up your cross, and you're going to do this on behalf of the family. And I don't care what you say. And that sort of, well, first of all, that's anathema to what it means to be American. And I would say anathema to what it means to be a Westerner. And I think even throughout history, that's pretty rare. Like the good parent usually wants compatibility at every level. Yeah, so I think, I'm increasingly seeing that younger generation kind of thirsty and hungry for help, but they don't know who to ask or how to ask for help. And it seems contingent on older generations to create the networks, create the spaces. And in terms of what Sartori is talking about, with like, as I see it, the real cultural handoff, like the real, whether a church is a thing, is whether marriages occur within, and I don't even mean church, but like a cultural handoff, like, because if marriages occur and you're still within the same communal body and you're not moving to a different body, that's generational sustainability. So like it might be that the single most important, like we always talk about networks and the value of networks, and maybe we don't always talk, but I think about the value of networks, and it might be that the single most important aspect of a network is the generational handoff. That might be the single, it's almost like the king in a democracy, or even in a kingship, the king has to do that handoff. So you have the good king, and he has to hand off to his son, and it's always like rolling dice. And the same thing in a democracy, even now it's like we got to hand off to the next president, and as executive power rises, it's like we're rolling dice. Yeah, and I think it's the handoff.
Okay. All right. So Neil just sort of laid out some categories here in terms of the gradations of, let's say, voluntarism with respect to marriage and a generational handoff. How about it? Any initial thoughts on that? First of all, Jeremy, I know everyone else mentioned I know everybody else is married. Are you married, Jeremy? Okay. Yeah. All right. So we're all married men here.
I have 2 kids, so I'd have to be married, right? Otherwise, it would be in. Otherwise, I would be in. No, I am married. Yeah.
Okay. Jacob has 2 kids. Jeremy has 2 kids. Neil, do you have 1 or 2 daughters?
Just one.
1 daughter. And Michael just had number 4 or 5?
4.
Number 4? Okay,
Yep.
and I've got 5 adult children, so there we are. There we are.
I was
Well-
going. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, it's funny. Just the thought that was popping in my head with this whole thing, and I've thought about this is there's definitely very different kinds of marriage, and it's interesting because I think they're both like pretty well represented in the Bible. Like the one is kind of like almost this brother sister marriage, which, well, that's kind of what you got like Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, or whatever, and even Abraham and Sarah. But very close knit with the clan. But then there's also this thing of like marrying the stranger and the foreigner. So it's a spectrum between those things, and arranging the possibility for that spectrum is kind of the trick.
Well, that's a really, boy, there's so many issues in this. Jeremy, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Okay. Then you go. So I was going to say that if we look at arranged marriage as coming from a kind of traditional religious background, we should then maybe think about the idea that this kind of Petersonian notion of we are actually engaged in a non-traditional religion, right? Which is this religion of worshiping X, Y, or Z. That's setting up the highest, which is our default religion, right? And if our default religion is, consumerist or, all about the individual or whatever, and elevates that to the highest, and then we set up all our rituals around that, that is effectively a religion. So such a religion could probably have the same categories as what you had, Neil, so that when you had like the full authenticity, which is like, go out there and be your best, was probably like the most extreme version. That's category 4, right? That's the conservative version of the authenticity religion, is to kind of just say, maximize, and only by being your true and authentic self will you eventually meet the person, because that's kismet, that's your fate, right? Universe will take care of you almost, right? And then the alternative is like the soft aligning would be that pulling back, where somebody kind of is halfway towards that idea, but still has more traditional notions of marriage. So maybe they are pressuring their kid to kind of think about, maybe you should think if the person's a good fit. Maybe it's not so easy if you marry somebody from like halfway around the world, because there's complexities that only become obvious as you grow older, or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of coming up with things that are trying to think of problems, right? And then you can imagine a gradation in reverse of what you said, so that like the most forced marriage then for those type of people would be where you were to say, go ahead, marry somebody from your country who thinks like you, who has something that you can deeply relate to, such that you can find out that the well becomes endless, right? That's almost the limiting and the narrowing down of the modern progressivist mindset would probably go to the opposite to you. So do you see a counterbalance between like traditional religion versus what I'm going to call modern religion?
It is so, there's so much with this, because part of the reality is that there are so many layers to this. There's economic layers, there's social layers, there's religious layers. And if you look at the evolution of marriage over the last 500 years, and really over the last 800 years, there's been a ton of things going on. One of the interesting things is that you can find these what have been known as sort of period pieces, and many of the consumers of the movies of these period pieces have been women, and a lot of these stories, often set in, let's say, English middle to upper class society before the First World War, had everything to do with, does a young woman marry out of obligation or for love? And the idea of marrying obligation would tend to be you're going to marry an older man who is wealthy and hopefully not too much older, but wealthy is good. And so do you marry the older man out of obligation for wealth and status to advance your family? Or do you marry the poor man for love? Now, this time of year, we should the update of these period marriage tropes that, again, women have tended to be the audience for these movies that are working out questions. The contemporary version of this is the Hallmark Christmas movie, and my we actually, in my extended family, we have all these different chat streams that my family and extended family have over all these different subjects. And this year we started a chat stream over the Hallmark Christmas movie, because even though it is something I don't partake in, and if I am forced to watch a Hallmark Christmas movie, troll setting comes in very quickly, because the standard narrative for the Hallmark Christmas movie goes something like this. Big city woman who has gotten her advanced degrees and is doing very well in the marketplace has to visit mom or dad or grandpa or grandma out in the little town somewhere. And big city woman has been very successful and has lots of money and has beautiful clothing and a wonderful big city apartment. But she now goes to the small town and finds hunky, handsome, fix-it man with a truck from the 1950s or 60s who's called in by grandma to fix something in the house. And at first they kind of bump into each other, and they sort of, she gets a little offended and upset by him because he makes some snide comment about her big city ways and her high status and all her money and her access and the fact that she's a globalist. But very quickly, you know what's going to happen. She's going to fall in love with the hunky handyman from the little town with the really cutesy truck from the 50s or 60s and settle down to become a trad wife. All of these tensions that you nicely marked out in your categories, Neil, are in these movies. And again, the majority audience for these films are, of course, the city girl who has the fantasy about the hunky fix-it man who isn't making much money, who lives in the small town, but she's going to marry for love and eventually become sort of Martha Stewart if she can really get some clout on the Instagram. So all of these issues are around us. And the truth is that these sort of paradigmatic, idealized stories, whether it's the period piece of the woman who is like, shall I marry for love or shall I marry for advancement? Versus the modern Hallmark movie, that's sort of the underlying conversation, at least in the American zeitgeist, about this issue.
I think what's flipped in my mind is the concept of agent and arena. And so if you can think about, so let's go back 200 years, or even colonial America, like Scarlet Letter type thing. So in that society, it is let's say the woman who flees a bad marriage does not have guaranteed safe harbor. Like, she's taking tremendous risk fleeing a marriage in that society, because the arena itself is not set up to receive. It's not set up to receive the victim. The arena itself is allied against the victim. And so in that case, I think authenticity becomes the saving grace, because the arena, if things go south, is going to be very difficult. And I think where now the opposite is true, where the the capacity for a body, you know, whether it's like a cultic church body or something, the capacity of that body to really enforce a way of life, whatever that way of life is, has diminished substantially over the last 20 to 50 years. Really the last 100, but I would say really significantly. So even, you know, if you're within the continental United States and you're in a cult, but you get access to a cell phone, like you could probably figure out how to get help pretty quickly, you know. And I would wager that's the case for the West as well, for the West generally. I apologize, Jer, for just being American centric, but you could speak for Europe. So in the situation where the arena is already the safety net for a bad situation, then I think the countervailing force to that has to be a smaller arena, or could be a smaller arena that, yeah, I mean, it's basically a network, and I think, you know, I'm looking at this question through the American lens, and the American lens is like full authenticity, and even TLC is like full authenticity. So it's the lens of like, okay, I understand the world out there, and I have to voluntarily choose God, or I have to voluntarily choose marriage, or I have to voluntarily choose this person. But I can actually choose, before choosing a person, I can actually choose a frame first. And then I can choose the person based on that frame. And what typically happens, or what has been happening, is you choose a person first, and then the frame reveals itself through that person. You know, for example, like I had no intention of becoming Catholic in marrying my wife, and she married me anyway, even though her family was all cradle Catholic. And there was, you know, if you told me 10 years after our marriage that I would be like very much vested in my faith, I would have said, there's no way under the sun, you're out of your mind, you know, all those things, which worked out. But what I'm saying is like that, I think it's related to this same like altar call to Jesus moment that doesn't seem to be happening now. Like the way that the hippies were converted in the 60s and 70s with like, you know, the sudden experience, the road to Damascus, and like an encounter with the person, and then a move to an arena based on that encounter with the person. I think instead the script has flipped, and so can first be the figuring out the arena, and then the person comes. Yeah. Anyway, thoughts on that?
I love all of this as an idea. In fact, I love it so much. All I can think is that like none of this will ever pan out because it makes too much sense. I mean, really, it's so unfortunate to think like that. But I talk to like at school, I teach high schoolers. So I talk to like 16, 17, 18-year-old kids all day, every day. And seriously, to get them to even understand what you're trying to communicate here with just the framing, I think is a hard concept for them to be able to grasp. So I don't want to crap on this idea because I really love the idea, but the whole thing seems very antithetical to just Western sensibility as a whole, and this spirit of like this countercultural spirit. And I know some of the counterculture kind of has pushed people towards a kind of like trad wife thing, but it's not a real trad wife. It's like trad wife for Instagram. You know, it's like I think they've kind of turned those things into kinks more than genuine, you know, living off the grid or something. And so I don't know. Like I said, this is what the debates always come down to with me and my friends at church, is that like we love the idea and we love the idea of, you know, like the passing down of culture, like you were talking about. I think it's brilliant. But it's, I mean, you're fighting against how you know, a century, maybe a century and a half of like feminism. You're fighting against these little pocket demons that every single child has. Like you're fighting against, I don't know, it just seems insurmountable to get through to a framework where we could talk about this in a pragmatic, you know, is there a pragmatic vision for this? That's what
I want to sort of take the marriage conversation and connect it to Jeremy's pitch a little bit here, because we're all dudes, we're all married dudes, we're all fathers, and we're all Western, and we're talking about things like frameworks and paradigms. When I think Jeremy's pitch in terms of the Haggard of your own understanding, the Christ of your understanding, the trad wife of your own understanding, the home life of your own understanding, these things are so often set by art. And when I say art, I don't just mean high art, I mean low art, like the Hallmark Christmas movie. I mean, the Hallmark Christmas movie has a level of artistic reach that an Orthodox iconographer, would love to reach at some point, because that Hallmark Christmas movie is going to be shaping the marriage imaginaries of an entire generation of young women. And even though it's a feminist trope that it's a man's world, and they can point to evidence if people like evidence pointing, women tend to dominate arenic shapings, especially and this is part of the interesting trade-off, women's power to shape arenic or to govern arenas, I would assert, very much depends on motherhood and marriage, because women tend to shape things through men. And part of what's happened with the trope of the girl boss is the desire to shape things directly, but that sort of direct shaping opens up women to the kind of competition they usually would rather avoid, which is sort of direct conflict, which tends to be much more a male space. And where women have, I think, via the shadow matriarchy and many of these other things, have tended to compete indirectly. They will send men to war. They will send men to build, but they will have children. They will create spaces. If we sort of look at the masculine as sort of the direct, let's say the god number 2, and the feminine as the arenic, let's say god number 1, now suddenly you've got a different framework. And whereas, Neil, you've got your 4 categories, it's highly unusual, I think, even broadly culturally, that women have had zero say in marriage. And the reason for that is, all across cultures, they've appreciated the fact that if something as foundational as a marriage has zero volunteerism in it, it's probably not going to work the way everyone wants it to work. Then you're just sort of a step above, or maybe just at the slavery level. But it's very interesting the way this is pouring out, because part of what happened, I think, in what happened, if you read, let's say, Mary Harrington, in the Industrial Revolution, you have this disruption of very long-term cultural issues. And so, I've talked about the period piece, which tends to be Victorian England, and we've talked about the Hallmark movie, which tends to be contemporary. But before that, of course, at least in the West, at least in America, you had the post-war trad wife, who the husband is making, upwards of $250,000 or $500,000 a year in order to be able to afford that lifestyle. And if that 130K poverty level is thing, I mean, a good healthy household income in America now is going to be $250,000 to $300,000 a year in a place like California, if you actually want to live what was ostensibly a middle-class lifestyle 40 years ago. So if you're going to be a trad wife, your husband's going to have to earn, nosebleed amounts of cash. And, and so part of what happened in the counterculture was the wheels coming off the post-war marriage paradigm where the man's going to have a pension, the man's going to be able to provide, the woman's going to be able to stay home, and a generation of children saw their parents divorce. A generation of children saw their mothers go into poverty. A generation of mothers told their daughters, yeah, you can marry, but you'd better at least have a career to fall back on, because if that bastard cheats on you or leaves you, you're going to need, probably with kids in tow, to make ends meet. So there's a ton here. But now we've come to the point, a la say Michael's point of this article that I posted on CRC Voices and got from CRC Voices about, is the poverty line really about $130,000 a year? Now suddenly we're in the frame that, if realistically you want to get into a home in your 20s in California, you'd better have a family working together to be able to accomplish this. And so it's kind of come full circle, and we have a new situation where if you're part of a kinship network that works economically, that's what you need to go far. That the nuclear family alone is now insufficient.
Yeah, just to speak to that a little bit, like related to this topic, and I think it may be a uniquely American thing or started in the US, but this concept of like complete financial independence from your parents the minute you become an adult or graduate college, like the parable of the prodigal son, that it's not that case. I think of ethnic communities, immigration communities that come to the US, multi generations working together, like the level of financial independence then lends credence to that category one, where you have full authentic autonomy to choose your partner. Whereas if you think of a situation where, oh yeah, I do need a loan from my parents in order to have like a side apartment next to my parents' home or something like that, or I do need this, then there should be sort of a give and take in that financial arrangement, which is always tricky with family. And for the United States, and really in recent history, I would say we seem to have forgotten that the financial binding between family and social connection was a thing. But I think of things like housing costs and in high value places of the United States, and has there ever been a time in history where the children were expected to be completely financial? And I guess I'm asking two questions. Has there ever been a time in history where the children have been expected to be completely financially independent when they hit a certain age, like 21? And number two, has there ever been a time in history where that financial dependence has not come with certain expectations, relationships, members of a broader social body?
I would say that yes, there has been such a time, because that's the story of the Puss in Boots, right? The son who ends up with nothing but the cat, right? And that historically the second, third, and fourth sons, etc., have always been in that position, right? Or have often been in that position, dependent on economic standards. It's funny how even when we talk about America, you mentioned America versus Europe, Neil, and like I would contend that Europe is a province of America, right? Effectively, controversially, no, not really. It's just a fact, right? Let's call a spade a spade. And economically, the same thing is happening here. Actually, if you look at every country that has the adjective Western on it, you'll see a hyperinflated inflation property market, which is a handy way to hedge against inflation, which will be needed to solve debt, etc. So, that's something that's really important. One of the frames that I was thinking about was the trad wife. What I wrote down was, it's the hot trad wife. Nobody ever talks about the frumpy trad wife or the cute trad wife. It's always the hot trad wife. And I was kind of thinking, is that just a base reference to kind of desire? It's like, if you're going to see a trad wife, it's like, of course you want to see the prettiest trad wife of all, right? But I think what it is it's kind of like a meta of away from all this kind of BS that we have in our society, of how to re-relate in a way in first principles. That sometimes it's just nice to like a woman because she's your woman. It's nice to like your wife because she's a woman, right? I like my wife because she's a woman, and I like my wife because she's a person, right? And I think we've been kind of transformed into this identitarian, or this, your identity as a person, your true authentic self is the person I must know, right? And then you could be an amorphous blob or a computer, but I could still fall in love with you. I mean, that's been a cultural idea. But at one element, it's simply fine just to like somebody because they're a woman, or for a woman to like her husband because they are a man. So I was jumping into that.
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead,
go.
Michael.
Well, I was going to say, there is this thing that's kind of like, sometimes they call it like marriage goggles or whatever, but it's part of the way that God's designed us, in that if you're not readily supplementing your visual stimulus with like other women, the woman that you show affection towards and have sex with and all that, your brain rewires to tell you this is the object of my desire. Even to, sometimes it may even be that you find other women that remind you of your wife, who maybe wouldn't be classically maybe your type or something like that. You find them more attractive too. So it's one of these things where maybe one of the big lies of the authenticity thing is in regards to our desires, and our desires are much more malleable than we are want to admit. And that can work in a very good way.
Yeah, that's basically what I was gonna bring up. I mean, like I said, I talk to kids a lot, and they're always ready. They have that little card in their back about my authentic self, my true self. Well, I have to be true and unique and authentic and stuff. And I always just ask them, like, what do you mean by that? And they'll just stare at me because they have no idea what they mean by that. And so I'm asking Jeremy, like, what do you mean by that when you reference it? Like, do you literally just mean male role, societal, cultural role? Like,
do you mean when I say authentic self? Is it?
Yes.
I think it's more to do with the idea that who you are and how you feel about yourself points you in the direction of where you need to go. And the person who can best, or the best reference point you have to decide where you need to go actually is located internally to you. It's more this kind of in my mind, this hyper inward looking process of self-reference and self-validation, until you get to a point where you might be totally stationary, but since you've become so comfortable with it, you regard it as your true and authentic self. It's maybe the polar opposite of picking up your cross and carrying it.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I think in some ways the cult of authenticity is I think, as Michael was pointing to, it's sort of a frictionless, feel good. This is the old shoe. And as C.S. Lewis pointed out with respect to, let's say, pantheism, because part of what was interesting is the counterculture's experiment in spirituality tended to yield pantheism, and C.S. Lewis noted, yeah, the old shoe feels so comfortable because it's well worn. It's not something new that you've described, but part of authenticity is sort of the slipping your foot into the old shoe, but forgetting that it's old, and somehow it feels fresh and new for the first time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just thinking, this took me to an interview I could probably not find, but Jonathan Pageau with this older lady, and she was referencing some kind of study they did. They give IQ tests to right after the Soviet Union fell. There's these old towns and whatever Stan countries that were living like it was 880, and so they go give IQ tests to these people, and they don't understand. They're living perfectly fine. They're perfectly intelligent individuals, but they don't understand how to break apart categories of relationships like the Western mind is so prone to doing, because everything feels very integrative. Is that a word? And everything's so integrated. And they would ask people, like, describe yourself. And they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. That you have to ask someone else to describe me, because I'm so non-self-referential, right? And so that seems like a society that would be really easy to integrate something like arranged marriages in, because everything is so group oriented. And so I guess what I'm asking is if that's what the goal of this is to do, right? Is to move away from the trad wife stuff, move away from the post-World War II idyllic vision of the nuclear family, and reintegrate more towards groups and networks. Is that what you're aiming towards?
Yeah. So I think I'm in favor of category 2 of those 4. So within the Western mind, it seems totally moral that I could, or that someone who's looking for a partner could pay a third party, complete stranger to find them a compatible partner. Like we have this willingness to have money even entered into the equation, as long as it's going to a third party that's independent and impartial and not biased in any way, and that money is not being paid as a dowry or something. It's being paid to the third party that is finding the right person in a matchmaking sense. And we seem totally fine to do that, as long as it's a completely unrelated person. So I actually think that the paying of money is probably I don't know, it creates this professional role called a matchmaker, and we've sort of secularized and professionalized. I think it's a somewhat sacred role, to be honest, the binding of people and societies together. Like we used to call that person that did the binding of people together the priest or the pastor. Like that was their role. And now it's the matchmaker, and now the person who presides, really it's the matchmaker that's doing the binding, and the person that's just presiding at the ceremony is, oh, this is my friend who was appointed by the government to just go through the motions of this thing that was once called religious. Sorry, I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but you get my point. So the reason I'm in favor of number 2 is like, I think the prodigal son or daughter has to be willing, or like has to be able to walk away. Like they have to have the freedom to walk away. But what I am saying is like, it seems like we, and when I say we, I mean basically society or the people that know these individuals best, have a responsibility for an alternative in a freely given choice, an alternative to say, hey, like this is an alternative to like the worldly options, and you're free to choose the worldly options, but like if we build it, they will come, sort of thing. And I do have that belief, when people, maybe this is something instilled in me by my own father, but like I think we each individually have the responsibility and the opportunity to experience the suffering of our own decisions, and that includes like the prodigal son going out and trying the bad thing for a while, or and being like, this is not working. All right, Dad, like what are the better options for me?
Yeah, that makes me think. So, like when I was saying those two opposites that I've said, that both you can find in the Bible, of like a brother-sister marriage, and then like the marrying the stranger, which is often it's a very it's like a really redemptive one. It's the prince rescuing not a princess, but kind of the whore, essentially, which is like the image of Christ and his bride. His love transforms her appearance in that, it redeems that aspect, but it's still like but the thing is, you have to have both of those, because, like, you know, like, so and I think this is even the Peter Thiel and Paul Kingsnorth are both antichrists. Like, that's on that spectrum, because, like, what Jacob's talking about with, like, that integrated village, that's good so long as, like, that village is connected to other villages. And so it's like, okay, you know, you live here, but maybe when your kids go and they go find a wife 1, 2, 3 villages over, and then some of the people from those villages come in, and those ones that are further out are connected to other villages that are 5 and 6, you know, villages away from the first one. But, you know, so yeah, it's like water that stagnates, because you have, like, you know, and you have this in the Appalachia and stuff. You have, if you have that town, that village that nobody leaves and nobody new comes in, you get a real problem with, like, inbreeding. So but if you just have, like, hey, everybody, connect with everybody else in the whole world on the internet and figure out, like, what makes you unique, that's like jumping in the ocean, you know. So it's like something between the vastness of the ocean and the stagnant water of that little pool. You need the flow, estuary, I guess you could say, right?
Part of what you said, what makes you unique, right? There's a place in Ireland called Istranvarna, which is famous for having matchmakers, and people come for a day and then they meet these traditional matchmakers. It's probably dying down a bit now, but even like 25 years ago, it was still a thing. And basically, what this person was able to do was to be able to broadly categorize the people coming in, you know, and because those people were coming from a culture that was closer to what you alluded to, Jacob, which was, you know, they were less hyper individualistic and more embedded in a common culture. So that kind of like your point two, soft aligning, Neil, not only was it the parents imposing or suggesting a soft alignment, but there was also a wider culture subtly and softly pushing that soft alignment as well. And because that matchmaker was able to look and kind of say, well, look, you're looking for your authentic self, but I've got some good news and bad news. True, there is an authentic and individualist you. Bad news is that it's a play on the template, right? And within the template of humanity, within the template of Ireland, within the template of people who live in the countryside, right? You know, and then suddenly you realize that your broadest categories are basically the painting colors that you've been given to tone with. But a true connoisseur can look and kind of go, you're this, this, and this, right? And that element of deep recognition seems to be what's lacking, because it invites the person to either through their own ego and belief in that they do know who they are, to find their match, or else it invites, you know, simple hormonal love, kind of like, you know, that kind of biological basis, like, I'm in love with you, therefore you must be my match, right? And it seems almost like a more thoughtful way to do it than you know, the broadest or this kind of individualized way.
One of the big issues in our culture right now, I like how Michael sort of laid out the sister versus the stranger, because those are the poles. And part of what we're struggling with as we've had sort of a globalist empire, is, again, we've been struggling with tribe. What is my tribe? Is my tribe the nation? Is the tribe my religious faction? And part of what has happened in America is that brands and let's say consumerist archetypes have sort of slipped in for tribe. Do I like country music? I mean, in the 70s, you sort of had disco versus anti-disco. Did you look like John Travolta at the beginning of Saturday Night Fever? Or did you look, and it was so funny because John Travolta just flipped from one category to the other, because right after he did Saturday Night Fever, he did Urban Cowboy, you know, and part of what has happened is the tribe, which was sort of a fairly was a fairly set thing prior to globalism. This sort of maps onto, so I've been working on the book of Daniel is this week's sermon. If you look at Daniel 7, you have the monsters. Empire is sort of against the nations. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, the nations were sort of tribe. And Israel, let's say, is a tribe of tribes. You have 12 tribes, but they're all sons of Jacob. And the book of Genesis sort of has all these different tribal groups. And of course, what empires did was empires came over and became king of kings. And so Nebuchadnezzar, on one hand, was an antichrist figure who, and very much see that in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar keeps going either from God's anointed over the nations into an antichrist figure. And he keeps just switching back and forth in there. And now with globalism, with trains and nets and jets, the tribal thing has been so disrupted. And of course, this, at least in America, it's so interesting reading a lot of 19th century and early 20th century European history versus the American 19th and 20th century history, which I knew quite a bit about. The great tension in America was racial. So you had African Americans and white, but that was sort of a cover for Irish weren't really white. Irish were just, these tribal people who came that we sort of brought over as the next class of indentured servants. And so in some ways, it was Irish versus black, because these were the two underclasses that the upper classes, but all of these questions about tribe are so important in this marriage question, because generally speaking, the matchmaker is part of the tribe. And as you said, Neil, like the priest, or, the matchmaker sort of continues to knit the tribe together, the different, king groups of the tribe. And what we've been living in for the last few centuries is sort of a destruction of tribes, at least in terms of familial multi-generational networks, towards the creation of tribes by branding, by consumer preferences, by, and this I think in some ways over the last couple of centuries has fundamentally altered what we mean by this book, by this word religion, because tribe and religion used to be like this. And of course, it was Christianity. And this is part of David Bentley Hart's question that he points to Paul Kingsnorth and says, I don't know that you're Christian. You sound pretty pagan, because, and this gets again back to Jeremy's really good pitch, the Christ of your own understanding was the Christ of your tribe. And now we're living in this globalist arena where everyone has to construct their own tribe. And of course, that's going to scramble matchmaking and pair bonding.
Yeah, it's interesting. Think about it. It's like growing up in New England, moving to Texas, it's like, okay, I find more people that it's like my faith. I can say, okay, we can connect more on that deep level of faith, maybe. But it's like on the chit chat level or whatever, of like social interaction, it's like I feel way more at home up there. That level is way more confusing. And then, there's certainly a lot of people who would be like, oh, look at you, white, male, heterosexual, conservative, more or less politically, and be like, this is the group that you identify with. And there's a whole lot of people that check all those boxes. And I'm like, I do not want anything to do with those people. But then I go on a missions trip to Africa and I meet other believers who thankfully spoke English, so we could communicate, but that's basically the only, we had that and Jesus in common. And those two things were enough to have a very meaningful and deep connection. And, and all those things are different, but it's just, like we're all just trying to figure out like what is the importance of those different roles, and they work in different ways. But I mean, it's complicated. We had a big live stream. There was I had started it, and I put it on Jacob's channel too, and we got some like controversial people that came in, like infamous YouTubers or whatever. But it was really trying to they were trying to incite some rage, I think. But everybody handled it pretty well. But it was a lot about that with like regards to like the Jews and Israel and like what is that? Like, is it a religion? Is it an ethnicity? Is it connected to this country over here? Or like, and you know, it just nobody's got really great answers about this stuff, and I think it's probably one of the big questions that you need to figure out. But when you do get married to someone, then gets tied up real quick, like your connection with them, and then you can work through all those other things from a secure position. Okay, I gotta pop out for a minute again.
Well, and these are in many ways the issues that we're wrestling with culturally. They're the big fights, and Christianity wound up being, you know, in some ways, well, you know, Buddhism did it to a degree in the East, but Christianity became one of these globalist, one of the early examples of globalism, because in Christ there's no Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. I mean, that verse in Galatians, boy, you just don't recognize what a radical verse that is, because now, you know, and Orthodoxy is funny in that, because Orthodoxy remains tagged to ethnicity and some older tribes and nations. Whereas if you're a member of the Assemblies of God denomination, you know, it's just Assemblies of God. And Anglican is funny because Anglican is sort of Anglo, but of course the Africans have now sort of taken over the shop. So there's a lot of almost all of the issues we're dealing with culturally sort of run through here. And because the question of marriage is on one hand so frighteningly universal, where without marriage and children, if you don't produce children, you're opting out of the future game. And if you're producing children outside of marriage, you've pretty much put those children at risk and at a severe disadvantage of playing in their cultural games. And so marriage is sort of this institution where it's on one hand the most universal, but also the most particular, because it's where all of the issues are going to meet in a very full-orbed way, day in and day out.
Where the rubber seems to hit the road in the data is in where young men land in respect to fatherlessness. That's where, like, the young women who grow up in single parent households tend to do better, at least economically. I don't know how well they do in the marriage data. That's a question I haven't looked at.
Girls without fathers tend to struggle with usually earlier sexual involvement, poorer choices of visiting men. I would dare to bet if you were to sample OnlyFans creators, the amount of fatherless women in there, girls who grew up without fathers, would be above average. That would be my guess.
Yep. Yeah, so there's definitely a passing of values, virtues, what we would consider morals, down to the children. And you know what? 100 years ago, it was very clear what the father's skills brought to the marriage compared to the mother's. Very clear 100 years ago. You know, you would only have the father go work in the coal mine, or go work in the factory, or go work in, you know, on. It's not that the mother didn't work, but the work was different. Um, and I wonder if another um, aspect of being a good father, and let's say cultivating a good environment, is the cultivation of a network around or in relation to the father. And that could be a church network, it could be a club, or a series of clubs. Um, you know, it's the kind of thing like, what if your kids are raised around the people and the things that you're doing, your values are going to be more likely to stick and be instilled within them. Um, and that's probably best when it's a shared vocation, like farming is the classic one. Your kids are getting up early at 4 a.m. and they're doing chores and household stuff and working on the farm. And obviously the factory system messed with that, because it takes the father out of the home, but then you have children working in factories and that sort. And we seem to rightly, I would say, reach the conclusion as a society that was not a good practice. So then the question is, like, what are the networks, and really it's down to about church that I can see, you know, the networks that fathers are in, you know, mothers too, and families too. So it's like church and clubs, basically, that children are then exposed to. Yeah, go ahead, Jer. Yeah.
But part of what you're getting at there, Neil, is what are those bodies that become limiting principles both for me and for my children, right? Because the church is a limiting principle in a way. As it opens up, it also closes down certain avenues, right? As does a club, right? You know, I mean, I'm going to take my boys to football on Sunday. If we decide to play basketball in the middle of it, you know, we're going to be out of sync, right? We are limited by it. One thing I'm curious: does anybody know if participation in clubs like that, like sports or um, you know, public speaking clubs or other types of things, does that tend to weight towards men? Do men actually get involved in creating or supporting or participating in clubs like that, beyond the 50-50 split that one might expect?
I think that's changed in the last 30 years. I think my generation growing up, it was more likely that boys would do sports, and, you know, you'd have a network around a soccer team or the basketball team or whatever it might be. And I think it's now probably equally likely that boys and girls participate in some sports or some clubs. Like, I could tell you,
But
my
men are the
9-year-old.
coaches.
Yeah, but my 9-year-old daughter is deeply engaged in dance, and that is a deeply
Yes.
team-based activity. And the mothers, if the mothers do not bond in that team, it does not go well. Like,
Yeah.
the mothers have to connect.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think it is both boys and girls, but increasingly the parents are united through the children's activities versus the other way around, where the children are learning the ways of the parent in a vocation, and then the children are bound to the community through the parents and local community members' shared vocation or shared work.
Yeah, sports is a big deal in America for children's sports. And again, men tend to be the coaches, but like Neil said, there are other groups, dance, but I would think in terms of participation of the population, sports.
Gymnastics too.
Yeah, gymnastics. Yep, yep, yep. but gymnastic is sports, and gymnastics would be a sports that the women would tend to be coaching more necessarily than the men. But if you look at soccer and basketball and baseball
Softball.
and softball, yeah. So there's a lot of that. But again, it's interesting because if you're looking through the lens of tribe, teams well, I think to a degree in Europe too. I mean, teams become this other substitute for tribe. In America, you have these, National Football League, Major League Baseball, NBA. In Europe, the sense is though that your sports tribes are connected to, I think even more so than America, connected to place. Because my understanding of, let's say, football culture in Europe is it is more clannish, isn't it, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, soccer is a bit different, but for the type of football we play in Ireland, which is the origins of Aussie rules, it's hyper local down to the parish, and the idea that somebody would support the parish 10 miles over in anything it's Liverpool v Man United, except on the scale of 10 miles, right? Because all the players come from the locality, and that whereas for Liverpool, right, you've got people 5,000, 15,000 miles away who are diehard Liverpool supporters who've never seen Liverpool and never will, right? So in that sense, it's become a bit weakened. But like certainly, I can recognise that at least in Ireland, we have this hyper localism for sport. Yeah.
Well, Ireland has always sort of been a fringe, though, too, because at least probably until fairly recently, hasn't in some ways the old world been able to maintain itself longer in Ireland than at least in England and other places in Europe, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably true, both through location and also, you can maintain the old world when you don't need to have the levers of power, which allow you to interact with the rest of the world, right? So that aspect of being denied the steering wheel probably helped us to to our culture, but also given simple geography, like to be able to travel across the country. I mean, where you would have gone from Dublin to Galway, that would have taken about 3 days 100 years ago, right? In distance, right, from there to Kerry. I'm not sure if you went down there. Took 5 days in 1805, right? So there's hyperlocalism then as well, right? Because it's through very remote areas at times, and so yeah, that can also kind of connect to it.
Interesting.
And then just love of local culture, I think, is a deep thing in Ireland as well.
How in Europe, how do sports and marriage relate at all? Do people tend to, or are they just on? I don't think they relate much in America, but
No, I wouldn't think so. Incidental participation in the same sports, right? But that's
yeah.
that's the same as that's your church then, or your local bar, your local disco, right? Just happens to be that you do the same sports. But to the extent in Ireland that you might meet people at a sports event, that would be because your sports event is closely linked to your locality, which gives you the highs and the lows, right? It gives you the moments of joys and defeats, that seek out the other. Like, we've won, who can I share this with? Who we've lost, who can I talk about this with? And given the fact that it's your locality, you have a certain level of connection with them. And most importantly, because it's your locality, you have this network of what I like to call the distributed Dunbar number, which is like I know 150 people, but the person on the outer edge of my Dunbar number knows 150 people. And through the notion of gossip and communal sharing, we suddenly have a read of 3,000 people and their fathers and mothers and their grandparents and their great grandparents and their cousins. And now we can tell exactly who is going to be a good person based on their family tradition. Half of those were crazy, probably not a good person. They're all nice people, probably a good person. And that actually plays an element of interaction as well. So I suppose, yes, it does have a connection, but only insofar as that it becomes a place where all this background knowledge can get and emotion can get honed into one moment.
Hmm. Hmm. What will it take? Let's say, who dropped the figure that 15% of women under 30 are married now, which was
Yeah,
it
that was me. It was, I think it was men and women. I think that
men and women
statistic
under
is
30
correct.
are
Yeah.
married.
Mhm.
That's an incredibly low number, although historically men, because part of what I see is that in some ways, a lot of what's happening in the world is we're reverting back to some older, more enduring patterns. And that in the world, men had to wait longer to marry because men needed to accumulate economic, reputational, um, competitive strength in their tribe in order to have value to be able to not only secure a wife but provide for a wife and give a woman what they're looking for from a husband. And it's for that reason that women have always had a much shorter shelf life in terms of prime marriage years, whereas men always skewed older. And even at the height of, let's say, the mid 20th century marriage paradigm in America, even then, men tended to be 3 years. I'm 3 years older than my wife. My father was 3 years older than my mother. That 3-year thing is a really interesting number. So I tend to think we're skewing towards older patterns now again, where women are going to consider marrying older guys. Again, just do a survey of women, how much, especially women once they get over 25 and especially over 30, and ask them, what is your expectation for yearly income from a man you'd like to marry? And right now it's sort of like 666, six figures, 6 foot tall and 6 inch. So I think in some ways we're reverting to older patterns. So then the question is going to be, and even Elon Musk is basically functionally a polygamist. So
it's worse than that. Can I add a cherry on top?
Sure.
The reason it's worse than that is because as birth rates fall, that does not really diminish the pool of overall eligible men, because like you said, older men are still valid mates, where it does diminish the pool of eligible women. So the plight for young men becomes increasingly dire the more birth rates fall. So that's where I think the network of and so the difficulty for young men is, and I think I forget, I don't know who said it in the chat, because I think it was Mark and Tbilisi, that young men need to prove themselves. And I think that's true, but it's actually a little bit more meta than that, in that I think young men need to show promise in some way, shape, or form. The proving yourself, because women on average want to marry someone roughly 4 years older than they are. It's 4 years. But yeah, and so women want to marry, if a woman's 25, she wants to marry the 29-year-old, she wants to marry the 27-year-old within that range. And the problem is that, like you said, Paul, PVK, is that men have not yet proven themselves at that stage. They haven't accumulated wealth, have a house, etc. It's a rarity of a small number of men. But there's a larger pool of men that have the promise of turning into the prince. The frog can turn into the prince. But women are increasingly less likely, or I should say decreasingly likely, to want to commit to a frog that may or may not turn into a prince. Whereas if a woman is committing to a frog that's connected to a strong network.
Yep.
And that
Yep.
network is committed to developing and growing that frog into a prince.
Yep.
That's a much stronger bet. That's a
Yep.
good investment.
Yep.
Yeah, my thought for a long time, and that kind of $130,000 whatever article kind of really makes it clearer. And my thought is that men need to figure out a new kind of arena in which they can succeed, like some sort of a parallel economy or whatever. I think, because once you do that and you have some sort of a success, you have the thing that can attract women to it. But it's in the current like status quo. Yeah, it's the young men that are really in trouble, and it's been, I would say, the selfishness, and not even necessarily intentional selfishness, but what was so easy for the older generations that they just figured, oh, well, we just figured this out ourselves. That was the message that was passed on. You figure it out yourself. And that does not help any of the younger men, because it's not the same world that it was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So it takes some sort of creativity, because if not, then it's always that problem of like, what do you do with the young men? That's like the barbarian horde. That's where it comes from, the young men that can't find women. So and obviously I think church is like, that's to me is like, that's the way of discipleship. And I think it's also the same for women, but it is a little bit more dire for men in those circumstances to figure out, like, there's all this. It's 60% of men are not going to college. 60% of men are not going to church. That's all your 80% of deaths of despair, all the drug addiction, all of the violence, etc. That the problem of like the message of toxic masculinity is just to say that's the authentic self of those young men, and I don't think that's true. You could make it true if you keep saying it. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy that you will get a barbarian uprising. But if that is also like, that is the potential group that can shape the future of whatever culture it is, for good or evil. And if it's directed towards good things, I think that, like, there's a lot to be hopeful for. Like, I think, especially noting some of the differences with like Gen Z, they're very clearly like stuck in a lot of ways, but they've seen through a lot of the things that hang up older generations. So there's a lot of potential there, but it's figuring out a new path for them, because the current ones are just really clogged and not good.
All right, final thoughts. Then I'm going to drop the link because I want to get this thing closed on time, so I get to be a father again today. So final thoughts. You don't have to go in order, but if you've got one, unmute and share it.
I was just going to quickly say, so happy Thanksgiving to all of you in America who celebrate that thing and enjoy your time with your children, all of you who have kids. I was going to say that there's one of the nettles that needs to be plucked is the idea that get out of here. That's a different stream. One of the nettles that needs to be plucked is the question of, in the 1980s, when people in America and wider were terrified of the specter of the looming left wing, right? Because it had this notion of economic justice. It relied on the fact that there was a bank of 1900 years or longer of culture, civilization, and society and institutions to underpin and support everything, right? Well, the specter is gone. And now what we have is the institutions that were the real power have been smashed open by the people who, to an extent, claimed victory in the 1990s, but who perhaps lined their pockets. I don't think that's controversial. I think at some time that would have sounded controversial to say, But I think if you want to doubt me, go take a look at your local property listing and find the price of that house 15 years ago, and then tell me what's happened. And look at your salary and see what's happened. So I think there's a nettle that underpins all of the things we're talking about. Sorry, that became a rant rather than a final thought.
No, it's fine. Rent's fine.
Well, my thought, maybe the next step, I think, is the metagelical mixer. You know, your church doesn't have all the right young people, but if the churches in the town can figure out how to work together and not be too worried about like who's going to end up settling where, I think that would probably be a good start.
I think I'm going to do a worldly news bit of the talent show as a masculine peacock display of mate attraction, and like TikTok as the mating display of, oh look, I could do this, I could do this, I could do that, and we need a metagelical TLC talent show, and we fall on our faces. Absolutely.
That's brilliant. I'm there for it. That's good.
Well, go ahead, Jacob. Final thoughts.
Gosh, no final thought. All this is just brilliant. I think this is really good. Let's see the kids pop up. I'm sure you saw mine sneak in here a couple times, but yeah, gosh, it's so good. I find it funny. We have so much friction right now inside, and I don't want to talk bad about my church or anything. It's not like that, but we have constant friction between the Greeks, and then because the Orthodoxy has kind of exploded over the last like 3 to 5 years, now we have all these non-Greek people in there, and we're in our own parish are trying to figure out like whether or not this is a tradition of ethnicity or this is a tradition of like faith in Christ, or like how do we resolve it? It's a lot going on, and so maybe that's why naturally occurring we're talking about marriages. It's like, I don't know, we all agree that this is the right theology. Do we let our kids mix and mingle? And it seems to be the answer is yes, but then you're like, oh wait, but is this the same as like RoCore? Do we let our kids mix with the RoCore kids? But I don't know, we have the calendar issues. Like even on that, if we agree on 99% of things, we have like 1% difference. We're having friction here. And so Michael talking about other churches in the same town, talking about like, I can't, that seems like crazy. That's too much friction.
Well, it was 1980 that the Banner editor, who he himself was a post-World War II Dutch immigrant, I've talked about this a lot on my monologues, puts that banner cover where it's time to burn the wooden shoes. And this is a question in America of this. America is sort of, because it's so broad, how again can tribes be reformed? And so, yeah, if you have a church that has an ethnic immigrant tradition, that church doesn't know how particular so much of their imagined universal divinity is tied up with Greek culture. And when you're in that silo, it's absolutely fine because this is just the way everyone behaves. And now you come to America and you have people who start coming to the church because they found Jonathan Peugeot on YouTube, and now they want to be Orthodox. You have a brand crisis because, well, in the Christian Reformed Church, does being Reformed mean we eat Oli Bolin? And then we don't allow members in our church who are unwilling to send their children to Christian schools, our Christian schools, and on and on and on and on. And so this is, as I'm watching Orthodoxy in America develop, it's, that's part of the reason that I just know the Greeks are going to have this, the Antiochians, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Romanians. I mean, they've all going to have to deal with those issues, because especially in a church that so overtly values tradition, then suddenly you're going to have to do the real difficult work of tearing apart the threads within the tradition. And if there's something that's going to really upset a lot of people, it's exactly that. And the Christian Reformed churches, went through this about, 50 years ago. And it's so interesting now when I talk to people in the Christian Reformed church, they're like, why would people fight about the Dutchness? That's just such a wonderful thing to have an ethnic heritage in your church. Yeah, but you can only say that because the Dutchness isn't enforced or assumed and seen as, especially with an immigrant church, part of what gives immigrant churches their power is that people join the immigrant church to deal with the shock of immigration, which is exactly what the Dutch did. After immigration, a lot of people who didn't necessarily participate in church life in the Netherlands came to America and went to the church. Why? Because it was full of a lot of people who were just like them, and they spent all week trying to make money out in the American world. At least on Sunday, you can be among your own. And, it's all these issues of tribe. And in the CRC, for most generations, you did not marry outside the CRC, which meant you didn't marry outside the Dutch. And they were all like you. Yep. All right. Claire thought she might have wanted to come in, but she seemed to have backed out. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'm going to close the stream early.
Well, no, my thought, Jacob bringing it up with the Orthodox, but my immediate thought is like, if the evangelicals throw the mixer, they'll probably be fine with the Catholics coming. They probably would invite the Orthodox. I don't know if anyone would show, but you're going to get a big thing of, hey, there's a lot of young, family-oriented people over at that LDS church. Should we invite them? And then it's going to be, I don't know. But I mean, I don't know. So yeah, those questions are always going to be.
Those LDS, man, they know how to make more LDS. That's all I'm saying,
No, their birth rates are falling very fast too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Claire, I'm going to have to, I'm pretty sure it's you, but I do have my rule. You're going to have to at least show me your face, at least backstage, so I know it's you. Okay, you can go back to the other, and I'll let you in. All right, Claire, what are you selling today besides Islam?
I'm just trying to explain to you how feminism works and how it has become the unofficial religion of the West, and people don't seem to realize it. And I think it's because you don't.
Ask my wife. You can't really explain anything to me.
I'm sorry. What's this about your wife? She doesn't think.
My wife has learned that there's no real explaining things to men. Men are explain proof.
Well, this mansplaining thing, I think it's because
men
people
like to
don't
explain.
want to understand.
You just can't be explained to.
I think it's fundamentally to do with the rules, and I think everyone can understand how the rules work. And the rule is basically, if you want to support marriage, you have to ban anything that isn't sex within marriage. And that was a very simple rule that everyone could understand until it went out of fashion. And of course, now that you're thinking of bringing things back again, people are just going to freak out because, you're threatening their precious sexual liberation and their culture of casual sex, which, of course, undermines any idea of a long-term relationship.
How many wives can I have, Claire?
Well, up to four maximum. So, I think most men don't have the energy for more than one, and even Muslim men say, it's all I can do to keep up with the only one that I have. I think the 4 wives max rule is for after you've had a ruinous war and you need to, quickly replenish your population. And then it becomes a terrible burden, and men say, no, one is enough. Don't give me more than one and expect me to, manage them. But I think that is really the problem. I think if the Europeans had been allowed to do that, if they had been Muslim, they would have quickly replenished their population without calling on their colonies.
Claire, have
well,
you looked at have you looked at birth rates in the Muslim world? Because they're falling even more precipitously than the West. Like if you look at
Yes, but
birth rates in Iran,
that's
Saudi
because
Arabia.
they're going gay as well, right? They are being gay. The women become fussier, because of social media, and they have far higher expectations than they used to, and there's no longer the social pressure of why aren't you married yet? Is there something wrong with you? Are you gay? Blah blah blah. Which I guess in the olden days, parents were not afraid of exerting on their still single adult children.
All right, Chad, what say you, Chad?
I don't have anything nice to say. Great conversation, guys. Great conversation.
I just want to know how I can get my one wife of 37 years to agree to allow me to get at least wife number 2. Well, how should I go about that, Claire?
I think you need 3 visitors to come, and after she laughs about the 3 visitors, then it'll happen.
Well, it depends on, are they going to be in separate households, Paul? Because if you can afford to, put your second wife in a different household, then you probably don't need to consult, wife number 1. But if they're going to be expected to live together, you mustn't make them share kitchens, because there will be, terrible quarrels and trouble. So they'd have to, you'd have to have wife number 1 quarters, wife number 2 quarters, wife number 3 quarters, and wife number 4 quarters. But in practice, it's going to be very awkward. But if you're wealthy enough to, have a wife in London, Paris, New York, and that kind of thing, then I guess you don't need to convert.
I've got a really
how bad her potato salad is compared.
All right. Well, let's. Stephanie, would you like to set us straight here? How many wives does your husband have, Stephanie?
1. He's good. He would say he's all good. You could to add a second wife to the household. I would recommend finding someone who's really good at doing all the things your wife hates to do. Let's start with that.
Yeah, like babysit, because I know this Muslim man I think men have this way of avoiding marriage by getting a kitten. So their baby is a kitten, and they delay for a few years this idea of marriage and properly having a baby. And then to his horror and surprise, this wife asked for a second wife to keep her company. And I remember him saying on his YouTube channel that he's never heard of such a thing. And but I don't know what's come up. So actually women don't really mind. If you look at these traditional societies in Africa, it's a kind of many hands make light work. And if I get on with the other wives, then it'll be fun. I won't be on my own, going crazy with boredom and depression. So it all depends on how normal it is. And some might say, there's a lot of poisoning that goes on in these polygamous households. So there's swings and roundabouts, but I think ultimately it can be managed, and obviously it helps if wife number 1 is okay with wife number 2. And I know Tim Winter, he said that there was this question of wife number 1, professional, she has a career, baby has come, and it would be quite nice to have wife number 2 who isn't a professional and is quite happy to stay in and look after the children and cook and clean.
Quite frankly, that all sounds great as long as they don't sleep together. There you go.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
where it ends.
you're not supposed to have sex in front of obviously it's this thing, but also you also have to be fair to them, and it can be a bit awkward when it's time to go on holiday, and do you draw lots, or do you just bring the one you want to, take the one you want to bring along with you, and then you have to rotate, and store and the holiday presents. I mean, that can be a bit awkward. I've actually got a book on it, and it sounds like a corporate meeting every time you want to do something like that, because there is this Quranic injunction to be fair to all your wives.
All right. We'll table the polygamy conversation right now. Stephanie, I don't know what you wanted to come in to talk about.
Well, yeah, I did. I just had a few thoughts. I think those were. Hey, I'm glad I didn't join up front because I get really triggered, and I probably would have sort of stopped that conversation or somehow not gotten in the way of it. So I'm glad I didn't join initially because it was a good and important conversation to have. And I can definitely relate to wanting to pick my daughter's spouse, for many reasons. So I thought that was good. I do wonder though if we are also making a bit of an idol or we have sort of do we have an idealized image of what women's roles used to be, what the ideal woman is, what the was it really that much better in the old days? I don't know. I think that it's easy to make an idol of so many different things, including that. So that's what's on my mind. I look at my daughter, and I don't want to say too much, it's too personal, but in many ways, she is that professional woman. But she's also not this person that I think people have in mind, or this stereotype of she's a city girl and she just needs to find it's not like that. She's a very warm person, caring person. She mothers, not she doesn't have any children, but she is very motherly and mothers many people. Uh, so I don't know. I just
I think that's what a lot of contemporary people worry about. The outward mothering in places that are not the household. And I'm not saying it's always bad. I'm not trying to attack anyone. I'm just saying that that pattern is the pattern. Like, you have to answer. We're gonna have to answer for that in terms of what our HR departments look like now. You know what I mean? That the outward projection of the pattern of mothering not in the household, not towards their children.
Right. Like maybe not where it should, mothering where it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what I was thinking about at all. But I mean, I know what you mean though. No, yeah.
Go ahead,
At the
Jim.
risk of keeping the stream going, when the man wants to leave to meet his family, but very quickly, I would say what you said there, Stephanie, about the past not being as perfect as we might imagine it to be, I think is a very, very important point that gets to a lot of why JBP didn't land very well for many women, because I think the dark truth is that things weren't so rosy in the past, right? And we have, and that's not a knock on the past, right? That's just a simple recognition that an aspect of it was not better. But there's some the flip has become too extreme, and I think it's flailing wildly, and it's not actually coming to a solution. So I'd be very interested to hear you and other people talk about something using the openness of the TLC community and some of the language that has been developed and the ideas and avenues of thought, and trying to jump out of the notion of what it means that the past was not so perfect, and exploring whether the solutions that societally have been handed to us and to you or to other women are fit for purpose, or whether actually, it's worthwhile repurposing them and re-TLCing them.
I wish I had the wisdom to have any answers on that, because I mean, I bought in. I mean, I worked when and that wasn't easy. And we were atomized. My husband was in the military. We were raising our daughter away from family. So, and yet, I really bought into the idea back. So I worked, I'm Pastor Paul's age. I worked, I was like that first generation where it was expected, or maybe there was still some kind of a choice, but it was really pretty much starting to be expected that a woman work in addition. And there were times it was very difficult. I think one of the reasons we didn't have more children was that it was so difficult to, handle, daycare and sick days and having two careers and all that. Uh, and well, again, I'll say this is personal. I hope my daughter doesn't watch this. She probably wouldn't like me to share all these things, but I had a conversation with her when she was in her teens and 20s, and I would say to her, maybe, you know, working outside the home isn't the ideal. Maybe find, a husband who would support you wanting, if you want to stay home and you want to have children, you want to stay home, he would support that. Maybe look for some options. And she wound up really, well, she's got a great partner, a long-term partner now. But I think she wound up on the opposite side of that coin, you know. Like, yeah, I know, Mom, it was really hard for you to work. I saw how hard it was for you to work and have kids. And now she doesn't have kids. And she's,
Yeah, because she has
I mean,
to work to eat.
where the rubber hits the road is how this plays out in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. When people get up to the 60s and 70s and 80s,
yeah.
what is the network that cares for those people, and how many of the next generation are there to care for them? My mother had a stroke 4 years ago. Thankfully, my parents are well off financially that they can afford having a nursing aide in the home, and that they have almost a permanent nursing aide in the home, like for 8 hours a day. I make it here as often as I can. My younger brother, my mother was 40 when I was born, and my younger brother, I won't go into details, but my mother was 51 when my younger brother was born.
Wow.
And so that's a story for another day. So, my parents were very wise because they were the age of grandparents. However, that means that my younger brother, although he's doing very well in his career and he has a family, they have 2 kids already, and he's also further away geographically. He is not in a position, as well as I am, to be supportive of my parents. But they only have, 2 children, and both of us sons are kind of hard-edged, hard-nosed. We're not the most gentle, caring of people. I've gotten more gentle with age and having a daughter. I definitely have. But we're not here all the time because we've spread out geographically. So, the question is like, what does the world look like when the childless are 60, 70, 80, 90? And there's a lot of like living for the moment. And I don't know that we're having the conversations with our children of like, what are you going to regret at the end of your life? Like, what are you really going to regret? And I've been having those conversations early. I don't know if it's going to work. Like, I don't have the answers to these things, but I think it's the question of like, what do you want your life to mean? Like, what is the value and purpose and meaning of the duration and of your life? And anyway,
Yeah.
I've got to run, but thank you.
All right, John, quick thought, because I got to close the stream. Oh, you're muted, so welcome.
Sorry, hi. I'm just coming here at the end. I just want to join in and say hello. I don't go by John usually more these days, but that's like a whole thing of my life. It's good. It's been very well. I'm talking to birds right now, and they're flying around. So life has been very strange these past 3 years since I first met you, Paul. And it's good to finally see you. And I love you. I love you guys. And it does be a great Christmas this coming. Yeah.
All right. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all who participated and jumped on. Sorry, Claire, I gave you such a hard time. You were gracious, and I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
But I'm going to close the stream and maybe a little bit about Betty.
I'm gonna tell you a little story about me and my friends, about something we did way back when. I was eating spaghetti and getting kind of sweaty when all of a sudden in walked Betty. Betty was my girl in these old days, and she had a lot of friends that were walking my way. Said first there was Helen, then there was Ellen, but the best of them all, she had the name of Llewellyn. She had the gleamiest eyes and the prettiest pose. But get this, Paul, she had some bony elbows. But back to the point. The point was this. Betty was jealous of my friend Sis. Sis at 7, Liz at 8. I thought the plan had worked, but it didn't work great. But take Fred's advice and never try that. It probably won't work and you might get slapped.
Slapped.
Yep.
That's my favorite of your raps, Fred.
Here it is. Soda. Gotta have it. One love, baby.
Freddie's drug. All right, here we go.
Ready.
All right.
One
One
love.
All right.
52.
52 in the can.